Rebecca, what do we know so far?
Yes, indeed. Another blow to China's bad debt managers. That an executive, another of those state-run managers, Great Wall, is under investigation on suspicion of corruption, and that's come from a statement from the kind of party's anti-corruption watchdog. It's also worth noting that the statement refers to Xu Xiaogang, the individual in question, as a former vice president of China Orient. So there are questions about whether this probe is particularly about maybe into his activities specifically at China Orient.
Rebecca, it very much feels like officials are trying to clean house here. Evergrande back in the spotlight again. What are the concerns about this developer?
Absolutely. Concerns about Evergrande really kind of resurfacing. Obviously, we've seen China telling banks to stress test their Evergrande exposure. So a fresh round of stress tests there. It's not new in and of itself, but certainly an indicator that, top authorities are really concerned about some of the kind of contagion risks about these large borrowers. And I think not a coincidence, of course, right now that we're seeing scrutiny of Huarong. So we're really, like, when we think about Huarong and Evergrande, these are two real giants of the China dollar bond market, kind of big players in the kind of IG and high yield space, respectively.
Yeah, what do you think are the bank's role then here, Rebecca, in dealing with Evergrande?
Well, clearly there is a lot of concern about, the possibility of contagion risk and systemic risk when it comes to some of these, the debt that's carried both for Evergrande and for some of the asset managers. There's a real focus on making sure that banks aren't kind of overexposed to Evergrande, and that, should there be a tumble or should there be stress, that banks will really be able to kind of bear with that, and there won't be any sort of freezing up of funding channels, for example.
Rebecca, we also have the restructuring of Founder Group. How might that change its plan or the plans of other Chinese companies when it comes to restructuring their debt loads?
Yeah, this is a really interesting and I think a really important and key test in the restructuring, particularly when it comes to offshore debt. So for global investors, they'll be watching this very, very closely. It's one of the first major tests where onshore and offshore creditors are being kind of dealt with in the same sort of plan. And really interestingly, Keepwell bonds, again in focus here, because the Keepwell bonds originally not included in the restructuring plan. So, again, when we look at Keepwells, Huarong also has a number of Keepwells. A lot of property firms are also selling Keepwell bonds. So again, this will be kind of interest for global investors looking at, well, if the worst happens, what kind of protections do we have if we come into bankruptcy or we come into a restructuring scenario?